So there's these stories in the Bible about Jesus, and I love to tell these stories, not just because they're good stories, but because they're true. There's this one story that happens in John chapter 4 where we find Jesus at a well in a place called Samaria. Now, what you need to know about Samaria is a place in the middle of Israel where the Jews in the south and the Jews in the north would not ever go through Samaria. And it has a lot to do with their history of being taken over by the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the fact that they'd intermingled with other religions. But just know that a lot of the Jews call them half-breed people, and it was something you never would do, is to go straight through Samaria. But for some reason, Jesus did. And so we find Jesus at a well in this forbidden place called Samaria. And this is where he encounters a woman at a place called Jacob's Well. It's at this well that we find Jesus meeting a woman. And what's interesting is she's anonymous. She doesn't have a name written down that's ever been recorded that we know of. And I think that's kind of interesting because it's almost as if she's standing in the place of all of us who have ever wanted to remain anonymous or who've ever dealt with guilt and condemnation in life. Now, the reason we say that about this lady is because she's at the well drawing water at high noon. Now, what's really significant about that is typically all the women in this village would come to this well early in the morning to draw water before it was really hot outside and before the sun was high enough in the sky, heating up the well and heating up the water. And so we find Jesus encountering this woman who has no name and who's anonymous. And it's almost as if Jesus is, because first he's in Samaria where no other Jews want to be, he's meeting this woman in public. It is almost as if Jesus is intentionally meeting people in the margins of life. Now, what's really interesting about this conversation, beyond the fact that Jesus is in Samaria and the fact that he's talking to a woman in the margin, is the fact that Jesus, being a Jewish man, would even address a woman in public. Now, these are breaking all kinds of societal norms that have been set up. And so Jesus starts a conversation with her and just simply asks her for a drink of water. Now, maybe it's because of her life and all the things that's happened, she automatically answers from the defensive and she says, how is it that you, a Jew, and I'm a woman, that you would ask me for something to drink? And Jesus, not being the typical rabbi, says to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink of water, then you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And so what's kind of interesting is that Jesus is breaking societal norms and starts saying to this woman, I'm not your typical Jew and I'm not your typical man. I'm here to give you something more, conversion. Now, I use the word conversion here, which is not a word that Jesus used in this scenario, or it's not something you're going to find in this passage, but I use the word conversion because it's a third alternative that Jesus was offering to her. Now, the first alternative is something that this woman was very familiar with because she is reacting from a defensive standpoint when she says, how can you ask me for something to drink? And that's because her whole life she's been offered condemnation, which people have always condemned her for who she was or the way that she lived her life or her past. And the other part of the second option would be to condone her behavior. And I don't even think that that was an option for her, that she thought Jesus would condone her as a person. And so Jesus doesn't condemn her and he doesn't condone her behavior. He comes and when he offers her living water, he's offering her this revolutionary third option, which is conversion. And so when Jesus says to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for water, then you would have asked and I would give you something new, something fresh, living water. And so Jesus is offering her a conversion experience through the living water of Christ. Now, to offer this lady a real conversion experience, Jesus has to dig deeper into her life, and which is always a part of a true conversion experience, is where Jesus reaches into the darkness of our life and he pulls some things into the light. Now, he does this for this woman, and he doesn't do it to condemn her or to hurt her, to make fun of her, because quite possibly this is the reason that she didn't socialize with the other women, or quite possibly this is why she answered Jesus from a defensive tone of voice, or maybe this is why she has so much guilt in her life. Well, Jesus says to her one thing: go and get your husband and come back and we'll continue our conversation. Well, of course, she kind of shies down from it, says, I don't have a husband, and which was true. And Jesus says to her, which was prophesying, because she didn't offer this up about herself. Jesus says, well, you're right in saying that you don't have a husband. The truth is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you live with now, he's not your husband. And so it's like Jesus reaches down and grabs something, the darkness of her life, and he brings it into full light. Now, he does this in a loving and tactful way, because in order for him to fill her with living water, he's got to dig deep. And he's got to dig into the darkness of her life and pull out maybe that root issue of her life. And this is where Jesus knows how to intersect her greatest need with living water. So there's a point in this conversation now where Jesus has reached into her past and brought a lot of it into focus. And it's amazing now because Jesus has gained her trust. And it's not that she's running from Jesus in this conversation, because the next thing that happens in the conversation, she actually goes deeper into discussion. She asked Jesus a question, and it had to do with worship, and it had to do with ritual and religion, or perhaps it didn't. Well, she asked Jesus, where should I worship God? Everything that she had been taught growing up was they had worshiped God on the mountain where they lived. But all the other Jews would make a yearly pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And so she says to Jesus, well, where should I worship at? Should I worship here on the mountain, or should I be going down to Jerusalem? And it's almost a question where she's kind of wanting to get at this option A or option B, like condemnation or condoning. But Jesus, he flips the script again, and he offers a third option. And he says to her, well, truthfully, there'll come a time when worshipers of God will actually worship everywhere, and will worship in truth and in spirit. Well, not only is this third option enlightening to her, it's actually dealing with her real question, because her real question was, how can I connect with God? I really don't think it had to do with location as much as her saying, how can someone like me connect with God? Because the next thing that she says is, well, I know that there's a Messiah coming. And when the Messiah gets here, he'll clear all this up for us. And he'll tell us how to worship a God and how to connect. And it's at that moment where Jesus reveals himself. And he says to her in Greek, ego eimi, which is, I am he. That one thing you're looking for, that one connection, that connecting to God, I'm right here in front of you. I am the living water. And so now Jesus has persevered through this conversation and found a way to draw her to this point of conversion and connecting with the living water. So what does this story mean to you? I can tell you what it means to me. This is where I see Jesus, who's being so effective in his ministry, who finds a way to reach people in the margins, not to condemn them or to condone them, but to offer them conversion, to give them something different, something that they've never been offered before, living water, truth. And so for me, it's really a conviction for me to get out of my insular way of living, or to walk away from patterns of condemnation, or not willing to offer truth as a way of condoning other people's lives. To actually be a catalyst in society, to find ways where I can communicate to people a truth, a life-changing truth. And this is where I learned that Jesus, at this well, offers this woman exactly that.